Thank you all for spending your lunchtime here. You can tell it's lunch because we've been talking about food the last 15 minutes, I think. I'm Mitch Graffeo. I'm with Tech Launch Arizona. A lot of you, I'm sure you already know that we are the department at the university that helps advance ideas and technologies from conception to where they can make an impact, and in particular in medicine. And today we're here with Dean Mike Abecassis. It's the Dean of College of Medicine. Welcome, Dean Abecassis.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you too for sharing your lunch and time with us and your lunch stories with us. And before we get into your vision for the College of Medicine, I'd like to give folks a little bit of a context. So as you share your thoughts, they know that some of your vision is partially rooted in your own practical experiences, where you have experience from advancing a technology for anticipating liver graft rejection into a real world diagnostic. And I just want to let people know that, so that when you're sharing your vision for the College of Medicine, they realize that it's really rooted in some practical experiences of your own. So, having said that, if you wouldn't mind sharing your vision for the translation of bench to bedside innovation at the College of Medicine and the benefits that has for the College of Medicine.
Sure. Well, I think a College of Medicine is really where questions turn into hypotheses that are rigorously tested through scientific investigation, often beginning in vitro at a molecular or cellular level, and then leading to in vivo applications in preclinical and eventually clinical trials. And so, I think a College of Medicine, and our College of Medicine should be no exception to this, is where translational medicine, which, by the way, that term is interpreted many different ways, but the way that I think of translational medicine is where we transition basic science discoveries into preclinical and clinical research that eventually benefits a patient. Once that happens and you get into the different phases of clinical trials, the next step is to make that discovery available to patients as part of standard of care, and that requires commercialization. So it's a real spectrum from discovery potentially in vitro to being able to have, whether it's a diagnostic or therapeutic or device available to every patient that needs it. And so I think colleges of medicine is where that happens. And so my vision is to make sure that the College of Medicine Tucson is where that happens a lot. That's my vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And Tech Launch Arizona, we are a team of people to help do that. We have people who have expertise in intellectual property, expertise in building businesses, expertise in licenses, and we have contacts too that we could help bring collaborators and funding opportunities to investigators. What I hear often from people is that, commercialization, that's either something that's not for me, or maybe it's something that's too far of a reach, or maybe it's even a dirty term, but I really see commercialization as a way to get support from business end of translational medicine, and to help satisfy a need. If there's a need in the medical community, commercialization could help satisfy that need. Any thoughts? Any thoughts there?
Well, I think it's actually very simple. And, unfortunately, this isn't something that's taught or traditionally been taught as part of, getting a PhD, or as part of any kind of degree where you end up being a scientist or a physician scientist. It's just not taught. But it's actually very simple and very intuitive. And the bottom line is, if you ever think that whatever you're doing in the lab is ever going to affect a patient and be of benefit to a patient, there's no way that that can happen without commercialization. And that's the bottom line. And so, if you're doing something that you think is eventually, hopefully, potentially going to benefit a patient, then you have to start thinking about commercialization, right off the bat. So that's number one. And, when we're brought up in the academic context, we tend to view commercialization as, something somebody does to make money. But I mean, yeah, that's true. But also without that, the patient will never benefit from the discovery in the way that you envision, or even when you write your grant, you say, well, I'm going to do this in vitro, but the goal is to, have a diagnostic or therapeutic for some disease entity that affects patients. So to not consider commercialization to be part of what you're doing is just not, it just doesn't make any sense. And so, so I think it's important for people to understand, okay, so if that's true, then, what should I know, and how should what should I do to make sure that I'm not compromising the ability to do that? And that's where I think the key is. If you don't take the right steps along the way, you will compromise the ability of that discovery ever being of any benefit to a patient.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe it's a good idea to take people through the steps. And, even from your own perspective, I noticed that you have a number of patents, where you were the inventor on a patent for your discovery with the biomarkers for the liver graft rejection. What was the first thing that you thought when you discovered these biomarkers? What did you think? Like, oh, did you automatically feel and recognize that I've got something that's going to make a tremendous impact in medicine? Or, what was your head at? And maybe we could relate to where people are now in their discovery process.
Yeah, so our initial discovery affected kidney transplant patients and eventually liver transplant patients, but it all started with kidney transplant patients. And, my initial work, I'm a molecular virologist. And so, I was looking at why a virus that was important in transplant called cytomegalovirus, CMV, which is a herpes virus, how it went from being dormant, which it is in most of us, to being reactivated and killing patients after a transplant. And so I was interested in the molecular mechanisms by which that happened. And it turns out, we discovered that the pathways were, and this is going back 25 years. So it was, cytokines were kind of a new thing. Signal transduction was a new thing. And then it turned out that the major effects, had to do with epigenetics and chromatin remodeling as a result of injury and all kinds of stuff. So, I was interested in how the immune response to getting a transplant, affected transcriptional reactivation of a latent virus. And so, you're talking very molecular. And so, but I'm a transplant surgeon. So, I knew people get rejection, and the same pathways that affect reactivation of virus were also involved in rejection. And so that led to identifying some pathways that were involved in rejection, and then identifying that before that actually happened, there were pathways that were activated. And so that led to, trying to get samples from patients before rejection or who had subclinical rejection, and then identifying those in a blood test so you wouldn't have to biopsy these organs all the time. And so that led to, thinking about molecular signatures. And, that led to, hey, maybe, this can be, hopefully be helpful to a patient, to the fact that, through multi-million dollar NIH grants, multi-site studies, we were able to discover and validate, these signatures in the peripheral blood that were able to predict patients who were going to lose their kidneys from rejection. And at no point did I think about patents or IP protection or, which would eventually lead to commercialization. Now, fortunately, I knew people who said, by the way, you better file a provisional patent before you publish. That's something that most people don't know. Once you publish your paper and it's in the public domain, you can no longer file a patent, or you can file it, but it won't do any good. So you have to, file those patents before you publish your paper. And, it's a provisional thing. So if nothing happens, you have 12 months to actually file a patent. But if you don't do that and you go ahead and publish your paper, it is now in the public domain. So, people can use it any way they want, and, you lose that ability. Well,
You're right. Yeah, if I may interrupt, because this is an important point. It's not just publication of the papers, it's making the technology available to the public, which is a little bit different. So let's say you file a grant request, and that grant is awarded, and that award is available under the Freedom of Information Act, under FOIA, and somebody can get it. Then that becomes available to the public, and then again, it's a bar to patentability. So,
let me just finish.
Yes,
That's a very important clarification.
yeah.
If you're submitting a grant, you have preliminary data that you've published, because otherwise they won't fund your grant. So before you even go to submit your grant, if you publish that paper and it is now available, then, but the point that I was making is, so, go several steps ahead, and your discovery it turns out your hypothesis was correct. And so you have a discovery now that can be applied to humans. Well, the NIH is not going to pay for commercialization. So once you start to get something that you want to get into a patient, you have to start commercializing it. Well, to commercialize it, you have to create a company, you have to do a startup, you have to do all kinds of things. But if your IP is not protected, no investor is going to invest in this to get the stuff that you need to get done to be able to commercialize and get to a patient. So for instance, when we did our first startup, we had to raise all kinds of money to pay for patent lawyers to protect the IP, to protect the patents, because without IP, your discovery is worth nothing to people that can take that test to a patient. And so, I never, now it's, oh, wow, yeah, well, of course, but it's not something that, I was thinking about. And so that's why I think it's important. And as I said, anything that you're doing has the potential to at some point be able to benefit a patient, you need to start thinking early about protecting IP and issuing patents, et cetera, so that when it comes to commercialization, the IP is protected so that you can get the people to invest in the company, so you can get it to where you want to get it, so that patients can benefit from it. And it has really nothing to do with you necessarily benefiting from this. It has to do with the patient benefiting from this, and you can't get there unless you can protect IP. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for sharing that. One of the things you brought up was money, right? And I think a lot of people have that in mind. How do I pay for everything? How do I pay for the patents? How do I pay for my research? And so to be sure, if you come to Tech Launch Arizona and we file a patent application on your technology, Tech Launch Arizona, the university pays for that. So this is not a cost to the investigator or the innovator at the university. So just to be clear. And then, Tech Launch, we've got a bunch of experts who know how to handle intellectual property. And then we hire outside counsel to actually draft the patent application. So we do a lot of the legwork for you, and it makes the hope and the objective is to make the process very easy for
But I
investigators.
think and that's a great point. I think the important thing for investigators to understand is they are the inventors. Just because TLA is helping, so you are the inventor, but you happen to have invented this at the University of Arizona. So at some point, the IP is going to be kind of a shared IP. It's going to be you and the University of Arizona. So at that point, you're still the inventor and you're still going to have those patents. But anything that you invent at the University of Arizona has to be patented through the University of Arizona. And so, because this is where the work was done. So, contacting TLA is never going to work against you. It's, if anything, it's always going to work in your favor. And I think that's probably a misconception that some people may have. And again, I didn't understand all of this until, I had to go through it and have to learn it.
Yeah, and you brought up the ownership of the IP, and I think it's great that the university does wind up owning things that were created here, and that's a great thing because the university has tech launch and it has the resources to help advance that technology. It has the resources to file the patent applications and then to take various strategies to get that technology to where it needs to be, to the patient, to the marketplace. Somebody like you've mentioned before, somebody needs to do the research, somebody needs to bring it through clinical trials, which is could be $100 million endeavor. Somebody needs to put it in a box and make a label and ship it right to the medical community, whether the doctor, the patient. So this requires a team of people, and that's what we help do. So again, we're all in this together. I think that the objective that the
and one more piece, so when we went through this, we had to get an IDE, and so whether it's an IND or an IDE from the FDA, the university helped us through that process and actually, paid consultants to do that on our behalf, because, without the proper approvals, we couldn't do the clinical trials that we wanted to do. Even though it was funded by the NIH, we still couldn't do it. The NIH wouldn't even touch it unless we had approval from the FDA. So it was the university that was helping us, our TLA equivalent, that was helping us, get those approvals. So, which, I wouldn't have been able to afford the consultants to get us to do that. So I think there's a lot of steps that, a lot of us are just not trained to do. We don't understand it. We don't have the financials to do it. And at the end of the day, like you said, the IP belongs to the university where the discovery occurred. So it's a partnership and it makes no sense to not engage that partnership early so that it can be mapped out and you don't want to have an oops moment.
Yeah. And while we are still on patents, we do have a question from Dr. Joe Miller. He asked, how often did you have to limit your discussion of a topic because you felt that the idea had commercial potential that you had not yet protected by a provisional patent?
Never. I mean, in my experience, the answer was never, because, as soon as we were ready to publish something or something looked promising, we just filed a provisional patent with the tech transfer office to protect it. And then we can go present at meetings and we do whatever we wanted because it was already protected. We could publish the paper, we could talk to anybody we wanted to because it was already protected. So the answer to the question is never, in my experience. Now, it's very different, and this is where I think people get confused. It's very different if you're doing this with an industry partner. If you're doing this with a company or something, they will limit what you can say. And so there's two pathways to commercialization. One is to partner with somebody, and the other is just to do it yourself through either a startup or something like that. Once you get in a partnership with a company, then there's a lot of restrictions that just don't happen when you're doing it yourself through tech transfer, through a startup and stuff like that. But as long as you file your provisional patents, you're protected in essence. I mean, you're really not protected till you file your patents, but by having a provisional patent, it does give you a degree of protection.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up partnerships. One of the things that working through a tech launch can do is help you create funding opportunities. There's different ways to strategize advancing technologies, and that could be licensing, like I said, or collaborating with industry, getting a sponsored research, a funding partner. So again, by going through the commercialization process, you could increase your funding opportunities, and I think that's critical. For
and that's a very important point. So in my own experience, as long as, and actually came serendipitous, it was a completely serendipitous thing. We were doing this work, and somebody called me up that I had met through a completely different avenue, who found out that we were doing this work, and he'd had a transplant at Harvard and was losing his kidney, and nobody knew what was going on. And so, he said, I heard you have this blood test that could tell us whether this is rejection or something else. And so we put him into IRB, sent off his blood and said, no, you don't have a rejection. Actually, we should back off on the anti-rejection medication. His doctors in Boston thought that we were crazy, and because the test didn't exist. And so it turns out we saved his kidney. And so he, turns out, was a serial entrepreneur in this area. And so he decided, he was the one that alerted us that, hey, you really need to do this and think about commercializing. We had no idea what he was talking about. But the point is that by doing that with this person, we were able to get a startup company and then work with our tech transfer people. And we were able to get to the point where it eventually got commercialized, and the company that we created was sold. But the point is that while we had the company, we were able to get sponsored research agreements with the company, so that the company was raising money and was paying for our biorepository, and a lot of the work that we couldn't have been able to afford, and the NIH would not have funded, that was complementary to the NIH grants, but allowed us to do a lot of discovery for things that we wanted to discover through a sponsored research agreement between the startup company and the university. And so again, our tech transfer folks got involved, made sure it was all above board, and satisfied all the rules and everything. But we had at one point almost $1 million a year coming in through the startup, through investments, to be able to support the biorepository and all of the informatics and everything that we needed to do to move the field forward. And then when we ended up selling the company that acquired us, it was a condition that they also needed to sign a sponsored research agreement with the university, so that that work, that support for that work could continue. And the way that I saw it is, there's things that you can get grants for from the NIH, and there's things that the NIH will not fund. And so having the ability to support those activities through a company is very helpful. And at first I thought the NIH would be, these are the misconceptions, right? So before we even started the company, I called up the program officer, who I knew very well. And I said, look, we're thinking of doing this, but I don't want to compromise my ability to get funded. And her answer was, this shocked me. She said, do you know, every year when Congress appropriates money to the NIH, we issue an annual report. Do you know what they look at? And I said, yeah, with science. And she goes, no, they look at how many companies have come out of the research that the NIH has funded, because Congress views it as paying the taxpayer back for their investment in the NIH. And so she said, we list the number of companies, startups, et cetera, when we present a report. And she said, a lot of people in Congress, that's what they look at. So that was a shock to me. I said, really? I thought it would be like cheapening the research and all the misconceptions. And so her answer is, how can we help?
Mm.
And so that's where the FDA thing came in. That's where it just opens up a whole new conversation that I had not even ever envisioned. And so the NIH was completely in support of thinking about commercializing things, because again, if you do a startup and the company ends up employing people and paying taxes, et cetera, the taxpayers are getting paid back for their investment in the NIH appropriations. And that was something that I never would have thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we often write grant support letters for technology. So that's just, something else that we could do on our end.
And then the other part too is, if you have a startup, it allows you to write SBIRs and STTRs, which are, and the pay line for those are a lot more friendly than writing, a regular NIH grant. And that's the NIH's way to support small businesses that have a product that they want to improve on or something like that. And obviously an SBIR is written by the company and the STTR is written by the investigators at the university, and they often go hand in hand. But that's a great way to create significant funds to support development of the product that you're hoping to commercialize down the road. So it just opens up all kinds of different opportunities to fund work that you either really want to do or you need to do to get that diagnostic or that therapeutic or that device into a patient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even Tech Launch Arizona does have an asset development program that can be applied for, and it's it's specific to help technologies that are already with the vision of licensing. And we try to fund projects so we can help push them, make them more attractive to a licensee. Again, with the eye of getting that technology to where it could be the most impactful, and that's with the patient.
And that's a key word. And a lot of people don't understand what it means to license something. So, and again, I learned this by doing it. And so when we start up a company, we then did an exclusive license to that company for the work that we were doing. And so, we weren't giving anything away. We were just providing a license. We, being the university and the investigators, were giving that startup company an opportunity to license what we were doing so they can move it forward. And when we ended up selling that company, that license was then shifted to the company that bought the startup. So, it's like when I was started, like somebody said licensing, I wouldn't have a clue what that meant. But it's just you're giving that startup the rights to be able to then move that product forward. But it's a license. The IP always stays with the institution and the investigator.
Right. And I know people always thinking about, where am I going to get my funding opportunities? If we do license a technology, the revenues that we get funneled through to the investigator themselves and to their lab. The majority of the any of the royalties that the university gets under the license, the majority of them go to the investigator and their lab. So it's a reinvestment into your own technology. Again, motivating. More investment means more work, which means more of an impact. So it's really a win-win for everybody. And along those lines, can you speak to how good this is, this whole process, and the impact that the university makes? Why is it such a good idea for the university at large?
Well, I think for several reasons. Number one is we are part of a university that wants us to innovate. They want us to make transformational changes. And so anything that we as investigators or as a college or a department do, if it's going in the right direction, it's something that benefits the university in terms of visibility, reputation, et cetera, et cetera. That's number one. Number two is that, down the road, as the product, the test, whatever it is, becomes commercialized, there are royalties that come back to the university that will then allow the university to keep reinvesting. Rather than this thing goes away and some companies making money on this, and the university where the IP resides is out of the, I mean, it's a kind of a lifetime of the product benefit to the university and to the inventor as well. And so, I mean, of course it's going to benefit. It's one of these win-win-win.
Yeah.
The biggest winner is the patient, because you finally got something that a patient can get without being in a clinical trial. See, we all think about patients getting things through clinical trials. At some point, that clinical trials ends. And if the clinical trial is successful, then what you want is that patient to be able to get that product, through a pharmacy or through whatever. And so nobody funds that anymore. But getting it there is expensive. And that's where, this all finally makes sense. It's like, I thought we just finish a clinical trial and then the patient can benefit. And that's true if the product is already being made by a company. And that's what I meant. There's two ways to get there. One is if the company makes the product and you're doing a clinical trial, that's a whole, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that you or somebody here invented that is going to get to the point of a clinical trial.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Curiel may have a question.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to read it?
Why don't you try to read it?
Sure. So from Dr. Clara Curiel,
Yeah.
How does Tech Launch Arizona make a determination about the timing to seek commercialization of a technology versus allowing further development to enhance IP positioning and then engage industry?
So I
And
think that's a
we
question
touched on this.
more for you than it is for me.
Yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit. It all depends on filing that patent application. The patent application and the IP portfolio is a vehicle. It's an asset and it's a vehicle to help engage industry and to help get funding. But if you're going to publish, we need to file the patent application before you publish or make it available. So it all depends on the time, that timing there, when you want to decide when you want to actually reach out to industry, because you can't reach out to industry unless you filed your patent application. So again, it all depends on how early you want to publish or make your technology available to the public.
So my answer would be as soon as possible. You want to have this conversation before it ever gets to a point where you're going to do something. And you want to keep TLA in the loop. And then depending on how things are going and what the next step is, there's a trigger at which point you need to file a provisional patent application. Because again, once it's out in the public domain, you really can't do that anymore. You can do it, but it doesn't serve a purpose. And so, and again, this is something I learned from experience, and it was like, oh my God, I'm glad I heard about this, because you don't think about it. But the sooner the better. And a patent application is like one page. I mean, it's a real simple application where you put down the things that you're trying to protect. And it's a provisional one. It's just, and is it 12 months? My recollection is 12 months, or am I wrong about that?
It's a placeholder for 12 months.
Yeah, for 12 months. So you have 12 months to decide, either do nothing and then it just, it goes away, or yeah, we better file something because we're onto something and we need to protect it. And filing a provisional application is basically sending a form in. But once you start to file a patent, you got to do a lot of research to see, you want to make sure you're not infringing on somebody else's patent. You want to make sure that what you're doing is truly protectable. And that is where, you need the kind of expert advice that you have to pay for, and you have to hire, and you have to partner with TLA to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. There is really a strategy that can get laid out based on the investigator's time frame. So if an investigator needs to publish sooner rather than later, we adjust the strategy. If the investigator does not need to publish right away, we could then again, change the algorithm a little bit and readjust the strategy. Because there could be benefits to waiting to file an application, and perhaps you need to file one sooner. But again, that could be a strategy that we could develop. And it just takes a phone call, and when you call us, we're friendly. I don't bite. There's no commitments. We're not going to do anything with your technology that you don't want. Truly, we want to be in line with your vision and how this technology can make an impact. And what we could provide is some options for strategies. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, and I just want to tell you, and I've told this before, when I started doing this work at Northwestern did not have a TLA equivalent. There was nothing there. Luckily, I was collaborating with a partner at Scripps, and they had this stuff in spades. And so I remember I was in my partner's office, and we were thinking about this, and he made a phone call, and the tech transfer people showed up to his office, and we started, and it turns out what we ended up doing is he and I came to an agreement that we would just do a 50-50 IP sharing between Scripps and Northwestern. We each were able to convince the people at the institution that made sense. And so Scripps ended up doing all of this because we didn't have people like TLA at Northwestern at the time. Now Northwestern has this really nice operation called Invo, where you can make a phone call and get somebody, like here, you can make a phone call and get somebody to come and talk to you about it. So I've lived through a time at Northwestern where they just didn't have this. And so it became very difficult, and I had to do it through the Scripps. So I think we're very fortunate. And that's one of the first things I did. And I actually was part of recruiting Mitch to the team to be able to make sure that we had people that we could call, that would talk to us, so we could discuss all this kind of stuff with them. So I think the value of having an organization like TLA is only real visible to me because I was at a place that didn't have it. And so, but I could see what it looked like at a place that did have it, Scripps. And so it's really important to have people that are well-versed in this that can advise you.
Yeah, thank you. What did you think about the time commitments? Were you able to, or did you feel that the time it took to go through the commercialization process was palatable? Was it overwhelming? How did you manage that?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sure. Yeah. So, sometimes people ask, well, how long is this going to take, or how much time do I need to commit to the commercialization process? And I mean, from our end, it's really as much as you want or as little as you want. I mean, there's certainly the innovator is the expert on their technology, so we're going to need some time from them. But how did you find the time commitment that you had to give in order to go through the commercialization process? Was it manageable? Was it something?
Well, I would say minimal or almost nothing for me. And that was very important to my collaborator, myself. We just wanted to keep doing what we were doing. And we were lucky that this person who called me up and ended up becoming the CEO of the company took it upon himself to, do everything. I mean, he did everything. Like I said, it was very serendipitous, but he just wanted everybody else to be able to benefit like he did from this test that we were developing. And so he had a lifetime of doing this. He was actually retired, living in the Virgin Islands. And, he'd worked with the team that developed the human genome. And so he was very knowledgeable. And he had a Rolodex, he started and sold a bunch of companies. So my involvement was, every 3 to 4 months, he would call up and say, hey, can you talk to somebody for 15 minutes and tell them what you're doing? And so I'd get off the phone and tell them what we were doing. And that was the end of it. And then, he would take care of the rest. I think that was a very probably unusual situation. But if you have the right people helping you, I don't think you spend a lot of your time doing this. You just keep doing the research and doing the work that you're doing. And every once in a while, somebody may call on you to go talk to an investor or somebody to kind of just let them know what you're doing. Or, what I used to do is, I used to use the slides that I make up for my talk and just give it to this person and say, here, if you feel comfortable talking about these slides, fine. Otherwise, I'm happy to get on the phone and go, through a few slides, kind of show them what we're doing. And so, it really was very, very minimal.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's definitely an option for a lot of investigators. They may just want to sort of, have somebody who's a collaborator or a business lead come in and sort of take the lead. There's also the option of forming a startup on their own. I think we've surpassed 100 startups coming out of the university. So certainly, an inventor could form a company around their technology and license it from the university, just like any other company would, and and take it from there and advance the technology the way they want to. So that's also an option. So any advice you could give to folks? And also I want to let people know, please feel free to throw some questions in the Q&A or the chat. Happy to relay them to the dean.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, so actually a question came in here. Can somebody comment on the issue of using university space for work that needs to be done by the business or the startup? What's the policy and what resources are available if on-campus resources are limited?
So I think the answer is you cannot use university space to do something for your company unless there's some kind of an agreement made. And I don't know the details, but I know that you shouldn't be using university space to do work for a company unless there's some kind of an agreement between the university and the company, so that can be done. And I'm going to stop there because I don't know all the details of it. I think this is where RII might come in and a discussion with them. But I know that you can't just use university space without permission to do work for a startup company that you started. At least that's my understanding.
Right. And I invite people to reach out to me offline, but there are spaces available at tech parks, and there's a resource called UACI that could help you if you want to form a startup. And
now, if you're doing work as part of your grants or whatever else, that's going to end up benefiting the company, that's different. If you're doing work as part of an NIH grant and you're going to do that work regardless, which was our situation, then then you can keep doing that work. But if it's going to be work on behalf of the company, that's where we got into the sponsored research agreement between the startup and the university, so that we could do the work because it was being funded by and so there was space that was allocated to that. But it had to be part of an agreement, not, I don't think you can just, well, I know you can't just use space that's university space to do work on behalf of a startup without some kind of an agreement.
Thank you. I know we're closing in on time a little bit, but any advice you have to folks out there? How can they advance their research, or what are there tricks of the trade that you can you suggest to them in terms of advancing their technology, or keeping in mind that that everything they do has impact?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to find people you can talk to that have gone through it before that can advise you. Again, I think talking to folks at TLA early on, getting them in the loop, even though nothing may be happening for a while, I think that, again, the sooner the better, because then you're not going to do something that you might regret later. And I think that, again, I'm just going to go back. It's very simple. If whatever you're doing, no matter how molecular, no matter how basic, if you think that it's eventually the reason you're doing it is so whatever you discover ends up benefiting a patient, you need to start thinking about this very early on and make sure that you have conversations with either somebody that is going to advise you or somebody at TLA early on. And it may be you don't have to revisit that conversation for 6 months or a year, but I think you need to have, intermittent conversations to make sure that you're not doing something that you might regret down the road.
I think that's a great take home. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, does anybody else have any more questions? I think we've run through most of our time, and
the one last point that I will make is, if you're having conversations with someone outside, whether it's potential partner or something, make sure you have a CDA in place, or if you're sharing anything, make sure you've got an MTA in place. You need to make sure that you're not, sharing stuff that, again, might put your ability to protect your IP in danger. And maybe you can talk more about that, Mitch, and what TLA's role is in that.
Yeah, that's very important, actually. And I want to stress to people that when we do put an NDA in place, or a non-disclosure agreement, the intent is to help you to communicate with other people and to collaborate. It's not a mechanism for stalling or stopping any types of communication. It really is a mechanism to facilitate collaboration, facilitate commercialization, and facilitate advancing of your technology. And what it is, a non-disclosure agreement, it's a contract that memorializes a promise between two parties that they're not going to share each other's secrets. And so when the NDA, or the non-disclosure agreement, gets signed by the university and the outside party, it allows the investigators to talk about their science, and it stays within those two groups, so that somebody can't take anything that was told to them and then go off and act competitively, or steal their ideas and run with the research on their own. And so it's just very important. It helps you collaborate. And then once you decide what you want to do after you've had your discussions, then come talk to us again, and we could help sort of grease the wheels so you could continue to work with that outside party.
Yeah, there's a question here I'm just going to address briefly, and it says, could I talk about how commercialization fits into the college's strategic plan? It does. If you look at our strategic plan, and you look at the research tables and the vision elements, how many startups and how many patents, and that's a metric for each department. The idea being that the more patents and the more patent applications, the more startups, et cetera, is the direction that we want the college to go in, which is what I started out by saying. And so it is absolutely built and baked into the strategic plan in terms of metrics and targets.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, here we go. We have another question here. Can you talk about the importance and usefulness of material transfer agreements? And what should I, as an investigator, understand about those agreements? I think it's just similarly to a non-disclosure agreement. A material transfer agreement is when two parties make a promise that if one shares some materials with the other party, that they're not going to give it away to somebody else, or that they're just going to use it for the purpose that was intended. There might be some other agreements as to sharing of any resulting data from the use of the materials.
And this is where, once you publish something, you can't put a constraint on it, right? By definition, if you publish a methodology or, what a reagent is or something, it's out in the public domain. And anybody could just use it and do whatever they want with it. So I think, again, it's important to think about that ahead of time. And if you're sharing reagents or samples or anything that you think might have an impact on your IP and where you're going with this in terms of commercialization, then it's really important to have an MTA in place. And it goes back to the question, is this going to limit your ability to research? No. This is called collaborating with people. But what you want to do is make sure that whatever information is gotten from those samples or that reagent or whatever, that there's an agreement in place that says that they can't then go and commercialize it. That's your whatever it is, that you're protecting that. it really is all about protecting your intellectual property. And MTAs are just, a really nice way to be able to collaborate with other groups, but at the same time protect your IP.
Right, and what we don't want is, somebody outside the university to take an idea from the university, create intellectual property, and then stop the university from practicing something that might have really been theirs to begin with.
So let me make sure I know what you're saying, and I agree with you. But when you say the university, you mean the inventor and the university.
Correct.
So you're not just you're protecting the university, because by definition, the inventor and the invention occurred in the university. But really what you're doing is you're protecting the inventor and the university together. So I just wanted to make sure, because, and I know that you meant that, but the way you said it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Right. Because what we want is our inventors to be able to continue to do their work. That's why, I've reiterated that, but the commercialization process, being an opportunity for reinvestment into somebody's lab. And that's, again, I think that's the bottom line, how we're all in this together. And what we want to see is the impact made in the medical communities. We want to see the patients getting treatments they need, resources they need, even research tools, are fair game for helping the medical process. And so, again, everything that we do at Tech Launch is really to help advance technologies to get them to where they can make an impact.
And to keep the credit with the people who are doing the inventing, the inventor as well as the institution where the invention is being created. And again, it's all about protecting that.
Right, certainly.
We do have one more question in the Q&A. If you use published data to investigate or create a new treatment, can you commercialize the method that results from your investigation?
So I would say from a patent perspective, if what you figure out is new and not obvious, then it's patent protectable. It really depends on what's coming out in the data.
Well, I think what people forget is if you use a product that was designed for one application and you use it for another application with benefit, you can issue a patent on that. Even though the product may have been, unless it was specified in the previous patent, that it could be used for something else. And, there's all kinds of ways that you could still potentially create IP around it. Or if you use two products and they both are patented for different applications, and you find that combining the products has a different benefit, you could still. So I think it's always, the point I'm making, it's always worth looking into whether there's, protectable IP before you publish anything.
Right, and we could do that. So what we usually do is what we call a patentability analysis on the technology, because we'll look to see if somebody has already published on, the new thing that you're looking at. A lot of times if we talk about a new use of an old composition, that could mean a new route of administration or a new dosage form, something that's new and not already known. And we help you do that analysis. So again, it's a matter of coming to us, having the conversation, and taking a look at the best strategies for your technology.
Algorithms can be patented, processes can be patented. It's not just about, a product like a drug or, I think, if you think about the fact that you need to protect something that you're doing, it's worth having a conversation.
Right. It could be a process. It could be a matter of synthesizing something or composition of matter. But yeah, please come talk to us. If there's anything that, if you believe it has an impact and it hasn't been done yet, it is definitely worth taking a look at. Well, thank you, everybody. I want to thank you all for sharing your lunch with us, and special thanks to Dr. Abecassis, Dean Abecassis. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your experiences. and your vision for the College of Medicine. Thanks, Eileen, for wrangling everybody. And thank you all for coming. Thank you all for participating.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.